Hi everyone. I'm going to talk this evening a bit about my own personal experience of mental health. I think it's important while we talk about the mental health service that we have someone who actually uses the service talk a bit about their experience. So this is very much my story, it's nobody else's, so forgive me for that as well. I'll probably talk a bit about what it was like as a young person accessing a mental health service that really isn't designed for young people, or isn't really designed for most people in crisis at all. I'll be the first to admit that most of the time I lead a double life. There's the me who I let the world see, someone who's very capable, outgoing, good fun to be around, the person who friends come to when they're in a crisis. Then there's the me who I keep hidden from everyone else, the person who's a mental health service user. And unfortunately, stigma is alive and well in Ireland, not only with other people, but also for myself as well. I'm the person who lives with depression. I'm the person who has to fight every morning to get out of bed. The person who's anxious, easily stressed, likes to escape life by going to bed for a weekend. I'll be the first to admit that. But I'm a person who can get on with my life. I'm the person who has a job. I'm a person who works for other people who may be in a crisis as well. So I just kind of want to take you through my experience of accessing A&E in a crisis and what it was like for me. I suppose I was 17 when I first realised that anxiety was becoming a bit of a problem for me. I was in 5th year at school, about to do my Leaving Cert the following year, and I began to get extremely depressed for no reason. I began skipping meals, wasn't sleeping, and everything kind of began to take a toll on me. My friends went to the teacher at school. They didn't know what to do. They went to my parents didn't know what to do, and they referred me to a school psychologist who didn't really know what to do either. It was 15 months later, after I'd been referred to the psychologist, that I actually got to see them. And by then I had full-blown eating disorder, was extremely depressed, and had been self-harming. So I sometimes wonder, looking back, if things had been different if I'd seen someone straight away when I needed it. This was to be the beginning of my experience with the mental health service. One that has driven me to tears and frustration, one that has made me extremely angry at times, but ultimately has made me more determined to speak about my experience so other people don't have to go through the same thing that I went through. I believe that early intervention is extremely important with a mental health service, just like with a mental health illness, just like it is with any other physical illness. And although I'm pretty open with anyone about my mental health struggles, I blog about it, I write about it, I talk about it, it's still something that's very private to me and something that I keep hidden from most people. No matter how open I am about my struggle with mental health, there's still that part of me that kind of feels ashamed that I don't have life sussed out when everyone else has. Now I kind of realise no one has life sussed out, so that's okay. But as a teenager, it can be very difficult going through life and you think everyone's got the secret to it and you're the only person who doesn't know what's going on. I suppose if you fast forward 11 years on, I'm still a mental health service user, and I'm very thankful for the mental health service that I do access. It's not great at times, but it has saved my life on a number of occasions. During those 11 years, I've had good experiences, I've had bad experiences, and I suppose to get back to the theme of this evening when we're talking about A&E, one of my worst experiences was actually accessing mental health service in a time of crisis. It was a couple of years ago now, just as I was about to finish college, where some people might say probably the best time of my life. And it all came to a head one day in the middle of my dissertation. I had about 10,000 words to write and I was like, shit, how am I going to do this? And a friend came over and they noticed that I wasn't in a great place, and before I knew it, thank God that that friend didn't leave me that day. Before I knew it, I was in A&E waiting to see a psychiatrist or to talk to someone. The worst thing for me was going into a busy A&E and the first person asked me, why are you here? What do you say? you can't, like, it's very difficult when you're in a very small waiting room, when everyone's listening, whether they pretend or not, they're all listening to see what's wrong with you. We all know that. We all have a little eavesdrop just to see what's going on. And I didn't have the words to say that I was suicidal. I didn't have the words to say that I had a mental health difficulty. So I mumbled something, and 8 hours later I was sent to triage to be assessed. And I thought that was it. Finally, someone was going to help me. The hard part was over. And as the questions as the doctor went through the lists, you could see her going through the lists in her head that they all know they have to ask you, and they're kind of trying to tick it off themselves. And you can't kind of predict what they're going to ask you before they ask you. And it came to self-harm. Are you in any danger, or do you feel like hurting yourself? And I told her yes. And she asked me if I had been self-harming, and I said yes. And I still remember the look that person gave me. They looked up from their notes, and it was kind of like, shit, here we go, another person self-harming. What are we going to do with this person? So she sat me down, and she asked to examine where I self-harm. So that was one of the most difficult things that I've ever had to do in my life. And after she had kind of assessed me, she took me out of the little cubicle and sat me down in the middle of a busy triage room, and said to the nurse, "Watch her, she's suicidal." So it's kind of sat me there. And so if you're feeling pretty shit about your life, you're feeling much worse after seeing this person. And now I know that that's completely wrong. Now I know that when I'm in a good place, that I should have stood up for myself. But back then, I didn't have anyone to stand up for me. I wasn't able to stand up for myself. And it simply reinforced the way that I felt that mental health was treated, that there was a stigma, that I was right to be ashamed to be there. And after about 4 hours of sitting in that chair in the middle of triage, I finally got to see a psychiatrist who took me into a little room where someone was getting a cast put on their leg, and he did his assessment there with me, and I was admitted to hospital. And I was like, okay, now finally I can get things sorted out. It was such a relief to be admitted to hospital, and to kind of think that things were going to get better. So while the rest of my friends were finishing college, having the time of their life, I spent a month in a psychiatric unit at home. And I suppose you can look at that experience in two ways, and I often look back at it, and in one way it saved my life, and it was a very positive experience for that. But then the other side, I was treated the way I wouldn't treat a dog. I wouldn't treat anybody the way I was treated. I've only ever been in one psychiatric unit, thank God. And if there was a TripAdvisor for hospitals, I'd say we'd all have great fun. But that hospital would not have got a very high score for me at all. I remember actually one of the nurses, at times I used to joke that, so I studied journalism at the time, and at the time I used to joke with the nurses that I was only in there to write a story on them. And they kind of weren't sure if I was telling the truth or... but I actually genuinely remember one of the nurses asking me, because I self-harmed, if I ever wondered if I get a boyfriend. And I remember thinking, yeah, that's what I think about all the time. And I kind of wished I had a hidden camera, because I would have had so much fun. It would have been better than Big Brother, definitely. And I guess I'm not here to give out about the mental health service, because that's definitely not what I'm about. I believe the mental health services do a fantastic job, but I think they're definitely under-resourced, they're understaffed, and the money's not there to provide people with the service that they deserve. I remember for that full month of being in hospital that I would get out of bed at 9 a.m. And our rooms would be locked. It was kind of like a ward, and the rooms would be locked until 10 p.m. that night. And you'd sit in the day room with the TV on. And I remember at the time the World Cup was on, and I must have watched every football match that was going on. I could have predicted the scores at some stages. But I know now, if I was to sit in a room from 9 a.m. in the morning to 10 p.m. at night with nothing to do, only stare at the walls, I'd feel pretty anxious. So you can imagine how anxious I was after coming out of hospital, after spending a full month staring at the walls. I was so relieved to get out of the hospital that what at the beginning was about keeping me alive was actually making me a lot sicker than I needed to be. It wasn't about me recovering at all. And I guess from then, I've had different experiences of the mental health service. I moved to Dublin 2 years ago from Donegal, and I have to say that we may not have postcodes, but we definitely do have a postcode lottery. The service that I've received in Dublin has been vastly different to the one that I've had in a rural area. I know this isn't the case for everybody, but before, medication was the only option that was ever given to me. I was never offered, even when I was in hospital, I was never offered the services of a counsellor or anything like that. So medication became the only way that I had around managing my moods. And looking back now, when I was 17, I didn't need medication. I just needed someone to talk to. I had my leaving cert. No wonder I was stressed. It was perfectly normal. But at the time, I thought I was going crazy, and everyone else thought I was going crazy. But really, I just needed to chat to someone. So since I've come to Dublin, I've tried different things like mindfulness, exercise, and more holistic treatments to look after my mental health, and they've worked so amazingly well. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm in control of my moods as opposed to my moods being in control of me. And a lot of this, admittedly, is down to me and me working my butt off to make sure that I stay well. But a lot of it is down to the team that I work with. A lot of it is down to the fact that when I'm in a crisis now, that I'm more likely to get seen. If I need to speak to my psychiatrist, that I can speak to them before it's too late, before I have to end up in A&E. These are only simple little things, but they make such a huge difference. And I do feel that the mental health service is a bit of a trap that people can get stuck in. And after you're there for a while, they're not really sure what to do with you, where they should put you. And maybe if you're, like, I remember being told one time that I shouldn't be in the mental health service because I was too capable. And I wasn't really sure what that meant. I still don't know what that means. But I'm sure there's plenty of people who are in the mental health service who are capable. And I've had the benefit of work with a fantastic organisation called Headstrong, which is run by Tony Bates. And from the years 2006 to 2012, I was a youth advisor with them. And I was really lucky to be able to work as a volunteer with an organisation who was really wanting to revolutionise the way youth mental health was looked at in Ireland. And to be honest, I see there's people here from Headstrong, and I'm going to say what they do isn't rocket science. It's really very simple, but they do it in such a fantastic way that it makes it look like rocket science, if that makes sense. And what they do is they work with young people, and they actually ask young people what they want from mental health service. I don't know why that seems like rocket science, but for some people it is. And I think that we need something like that for adults. We need a Headstrong, or we need a Jigsaw service for adults. It's fantastic that we're providing early intervention for young people, but now that I'm not a young person anymore, I realise that I'm an older person, that adults need good mental health services as well. And I think we need a Tony Bates for adult mental health services. And it's not good enough that money promised to mental health ends up being used for something else. It's not good enough that people have to wait weeks and even months to see someone when they're in a crisis. It's fantastic, as Marion said, that we tell people to talk, but what happens when you talk and the service isn't there? What happens when you go to the A&E and you're turned away? What happens when you're told that you have to wait 12 weeks for a psychiatrist and you're in a crisis? That's the reality for people. There are people who get help when they need it, but they're the minority. Most people have to keep trying and keep fighting to get access to a mental health service. And I'm one of the lucky ones. I got into the mental health service. So I feel really bad for those who don't get the help that they deserve. And it can be really difficult because when you're in a crisis, you don't feel that you deserve the help. So it makes total sense that you get turned away or that you get knocked back. We need to change this, and it's like events like this that will help bring people together. It's not good enough that the government take 15 million away from mental health services. That 15 million is lives. That's people's lives that are being taken away. And I absolutely believe that we have the capability to produce an excellent mental health service in this country, but only if the money, the resources and the time is put into it. And we need to do everything in our power to ensure that mental health funding does not suffer from any further cuts. And for me, a good service wasn't always about money. It was about someone treating me with respect. It was about someone talking to me, someone who really listened, someone who got what I was going through. That doesn't cost money. That's just common sense. But for some reason, we've forgotten about common sense when it comes to the mental health system. And just to say thanks a million for having me chat here today, and just to say that we've all got power, we all have TDs. Use that power. That money is lives that are going to be lost to suicide, and one more life that's lost to suicide is one person too many. Thank you.